Hey guys, Scott Morris with Gateway Commercial Bank here. Many of you have reached out to me over the last few weeks and let me know that you've used all your PPP loan funds and are ready to apply for forgiveness. The government did provide us with an application for forgiveness, which was long and cumbersome, difficult to understand. So we thought it would be best to put together a slideshow with some audio explaining how to complete that form. Now, I will tell you that recently a revised application for forgiveness was provided, although much of the information is the same, and so we will cover the process for applying for forgiveness and completing that form here today. Before we get into the forgiveness process, I thought I'd touch on a few key changes uh, that took place as part of the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act. So this was passed after the original CARES Act, which included the PPP loan program. And what they did is they extended the forgiveness or spend period from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, giving you more time to use the PPP loan funds on eligible business expenses. They also reduced the requirement that 75% of those funds must be used for payroll. Now they reduce it to only 60%. Um, they they gave us a little more time to hire back employees. Many of you are still unable to really operate your business how you were pre-COVID. And so rather than requiring you to bring your FTE back up by June 30th, they're giving us to the end of the year to do that. They also extended the loan repayment period on all new loans from 2 years to 5 years. And and most importantly, they're giving you now the flexibility to pick, at least some flexibility to pick when your forgiveness or spend period begins. So you can either use your loan date or the first pay period following the day you received your PPP loan. So that'll match up a little better for many of you with your pay periods. Moving on to the application. So this is what the application looks like. As I mentioned, it's about 9 pages long, a little cumbersome to get through, and so I'll go over where you need to put your focus and attention on. Um, the first thing you want to do is go to page 3, and so you can enter your loan amount in here. For today, I've created a scenario where a fake borrower has applied and received a loan for $75,000. This particular company has 5 employees. That's not including the owner. That's the owner or owners and 5 employees. Also on page 3, you'll need to enter the EIDL advance amount. Now, not all of you applied for and received an EIDL loan. That's an economic injury disaster loan. That program came out in the CARES Act with the PPP loan, and some of you applied for both. If you received a grant or advance, that would be in $1,000 increments up to a total of $10,000. You will need to enter that here on page 3. The amount of forgiveness on your PPP loan will be reduced by the amount of that grant. Also, here you'll indicate the payroll schedule or frequency, and then you'll also determine if you were going to use your loan date or if you wanted to use the first day of the pay period following your loan date and enter that in the covered period. Again, this scenario is built assuming the 8-week covered period. As you all well know, that was extended, but you'll put your covered period here. Moving on, you'll want to go to page 9. Now, page 9 is where you'll put in the bulk of the time. There's a few tables on page 9. This first table will need to be completed for employees, not owners, who in 2019 made less than $100,000 per year. Now, if you hired someone in 2019 and cumulatively in 2019 they did not make $100,000 per year, but were earning income on pace that would exceed that, they should not be included in this table. You'll list them in the next table. So again, table 1 is for employees only. All employees that were employed with your company during your covered or spend period that in the prior year made less than $100,000. You'll list each employee by name. If you don't have enough space here, you'll need to get a spreadsheet or an additional paper to document all of the employees' names and all of this information. But that's where, depending on the size of your business, you might spend the bulk of your time. Again, just a note, this is for people that made less than $100,000 per year. Um, Moving on to the cash compensation column. In that column, you want to list the amount of cash paid to that employee cumulatively during your covered period. So this is not where you would include the benefits, insurance, 401k, anything like that. This is just their cash compensation during your covered period. You'll tally that up for each employee and enter it into the box next to their name in the column of cash compensation. The next column is the FTE column. Now, for this program, they do not require, nor do I recommend, that you calculate the exact FTE for people that work less than 40 hours per week. For this calculation, if they're 40 hours per week or more or salary, they are a 1. Anyone under that should be listed as 0.5. It will simplify your life, and there's no benefit to calculating the actual FTE. So you will enter the FTE for each employee here in this column, average FTE. Moving on to the next column, which is salary or hourly age reduction. Now, before we get into the details here, if you did not reduce wages to any of your employees, you don't need to worry about this box. If you did, then we can get into the details of how to calculate that a little later in this presentation. But here, for anyone that didn't make changes, you don't need to put anything in this box. The reduction is not going to create an issue for you, and we actually will cover any changes later. Moving on, this is the second table. This table should be for employees that made more than $100,000 per year last year. Also, you do not put owners in this box. They will be covered later in the application. So same calculations, same information, just for employees that in 2019 made more than $100,000 per year. I included some calculations in here that I don't think are really that beneficial, but if you were using an 8-week covered period, I did some math for you. This 15,384 is the amount that would be eligible for forgiveness for any one employee. But again, I included in the email that you received a spreadsheet that'll do this calculation for you, so you don't really need to worry about it. Just carry over the information from that spreadsheet in the boxes. Okay, again, just a little disclaimer to all of you, just in case it wasn't clear. If you did pay someone on a pace greater than $100,000 per year during your covered period, some of those funds may not be forgiven. Moving on, this is some of the information at the bottom of page 9. They were taking the calculations from the tables and putting them in the bottom of page 9 to ensure that you meet the requirements for forgiveness. So step 1 will be the cumulative amount, the total FTE for your company during the period from February 15th of 2020 to April 26th of 2020. Then you'll enter the FTE again using a 1 for anyone 40 hours per week or more, or a 0.5 for anyone that worked less than 40 hours per week. You'll put that all the way up to February 15th, so pre-COVID, let's call it. If your pre-COVID levels were greater than your levels during or immediately after, then you need to go to step 4. So we're going to calculate the FTE as of. Now this sheet says June 30th. Again, we touched on this. It's been extended to December 30th. What that means to you is if you reduced your FTE, you have until December 30th to bring it back up and still be eligible for forgiveness. Then they're seeing if the safe harbor was met. If you decide, look, I'm not going to bring those employees back, our business has changed materially. I still want to apply for forgiveness. I don't want to wait till the end of the year to get my employee levels up. You can do that. All you need to do is calculate what your FTE percentage is now compared to what it was pre-COVID and figure out that percentage here, and we'll use it later to determine what you're eligible for in terms of forgiveness. Moving on here, I covered all that. This is what page 6 looks like. It'll be the next page you focus your time and effort on. You will carry over the information from page 9 to page 6. So your cash compensation, again, this should not include the benefits. It's just the cash compensation as calculated on table 1. Your FTE is calculated there. Again, many of you, that hasn't changed. Whether or not there was a reduction. If that reduction, if your employee levels are 75% or more, then they were pre-COVID, just go ahead and click that box and enter a 0 in line 3, meaning you're still eligible for forgiveness here. Next, moving on to line 4, this would include the cash compensation for table 2, if there were any employees that made over $100,000 last year, and the FTE for those so that we can get a total FTE. So again, here's my mock scenario. Cash compensation for this company that we have here is $52,000. Their FTE was 3. They of course did not reduce their payroll, so there's a 0 in line 3. Moving on, they didn't have any employees in that made over $100,000 a year. I see now that I made an error. Line 5 should be a 0 and not a 3, but you get the point. Okay, now we want to calculate all of the non-cash payroll costs, so we can get a total payroll cost for later in the application. So here you'll put any of the employer contributions to health insurance, employer contributions to retirement plans, and employer state and local taxes assessed. So we'll tally all that up. We'll also include the total compensation to owners. That's line 9. And then we'll figure out by adding all of those together total payroll costs. Moving on, we'll carry over the information regarding the FTE. So the average FTE for your spend period or the forgiveness period, and your total average FTE from back here, lines 2 and 5, when we calculated that. And then we want to see if your FTE now is close to or equal to or greater than your FTE pre-COVID. Again, most of you, this is going to be a 1 on line 13 because you did not reduce staff. If you did reduce staff, then we do want to calculate what percentage. This is what page 3 looks like. Again, we want to include all of the eligible non-payroll costs. So you'll carry over the total payroll costs as we just calculated. You'll include any business mortgage interest. Also include in this line other interest. I don't know why they did not include a line for that, but put your mortgage interest here and any other eligible interest that you use PPP funds for. Put in your rent or lease, utilities. Next, you'll carry over the wage reduction that we calculated previously in those tables. Now, again, I do not recommend you use the tables. Use our spreadsheet use the table just to calculate the total and enter that number here. For most of you that did not reduce wages, that will be a 0. Then you'll want to get a total here by adding up your payroll costs, your business interest, your rent and lease, your utilities, and subtract the reduction as previously calculated. And you're going to end up multiplying it by the quotient, meaning your FTE reduction quotient. So that was line 13 from the previous slide. So here's what it looks like when we run through the scenario. Payroll costs for my mock company were $65,000. The interest was $2,000. We paid $6,000 in rent. Utilities were $4,000 during the covered period. We did not have a reduction in salary or wages, so that's a 0. We add all that up to make $77,000. And we did not reduce our FTE, so that quotient is 1. What you do here is then you're going to multiply line 6 and 7 from the previous slide to get this modified total. That's one calculation for forgiveness. Really what we're trying to do with lines 8, 9, and 10 is figure out the lowest of those numbers. So your loan amount will be entered here, your payroll costs, which for most of you will exceed the 75%. So your forgiveness amount, which is line 11, is the lower of lines 8, 9, and 10. Now, as I mentioned previously, we'll also need to calculate the EIDL grant. So when you see this 75,000 here and it looks like your loan is going to be forgiven in its entirety, please keep in mind if you got a grant that the SBA will reduce your forgiveness by the amount of the grant. So that's really the calculation here. As I mentioned, most of you will be quite simple because you didn't make changes. We're just gathering information and entering it in. Also in the application, you'll notice there's some certifications that you need to make. They're very similar to the certifications you made when you applied, but you'll need to initial and sign for those when you submit your application. Now let's talk about the timeline. The timeline for approval. The bank has 60 days to review the information you've provided. We've kept a hard copy and a record of everything you've given us for all of your transfers to this point. We'll compare it to the information that we have here, and then we will submit to the SBA for forgiveness. Now, I do not expect that it will take the bank 60 days to do that, but under the program, we have 60 days. I would plan on it being more like maybe 2 weeks for the bank to submit to the SBA. The SBA then has 90 days to approve your request. Do I think it will take 90 days? I don't believe it will take 90 days for them to make a decision on the forgiveness. If I had to guess, it might be more like 30 days. But either way, they have 90 days to review and approve the request. At that point, they will then pay down the loan here at the bank. And so that money will be sent to the bank. The loan will be paid down. If there is a balance due, we will let you know. And then you will need to pay that balance due back according to the original loan terms that we signed when you got your PPP loan. We'll review your file. If we find something in the file that we're missing, we will reach out, let you know, so that you can bring the file up to the standards the SBA is looking for before we submit, and this should expedite the process. So that really concludes the standard calculation tutorial. Anyone that didn't make any changes can sign off now, complete the application, and send it in. If you do want a little bit of a deeper dive, we can get into that. But really, this is the spreadsheet that we sent you that'll do all the calculations for you. So if you did have questions on the spreadsheet, we'll get into that now. This is the hourly wage. Remember, you're calculating this for each employee. Now, if you know you didn't make any changes to any employee's compensation, there's no reason to go through this exercise. But if you did and you think that it might be close to that reduction magic number of 75% of their pre-COVID, then you want to fill this out. So you'll enter their wages from January 1st to the 31st, and then what was their wages during the covered period. So What were their wages leading up to the PPP loan? What was their wages during and I use this as 8 weeks because we built this before the change during the covered period. And what is the average number of hours worked per week uh, prior to COVID? So when you put in those numbers, it's going to automatically calculate for you here the um, the wage reduction. So we'll punch some numbers in here. Let's say they were making $37.74 before. You cut them all the way back to $22.12 an hour during the covered period. You just didn't have enough work. They work 32 hours per week. So this is the amount of wage reduction on an annualized basis for that employee. So this is the amount for the reduction in the amount of forgiveness you'll have for that particular employee. So you'll see you're still receiving the overwhelming majority of the wages you paid them. However, your forgiveness is being reduced by $1,500 for this employee. So that would be entered into the table on page 9 for that employee. You'll do that for all the employees to come up with the grand total on how much your reduction is going to be reduced. Again, we covered many of the questions in the application, but I can't cover them all. We're here to help. Give us a call. We'll talk through any particulars on forgiveness, but I ask that you review the slideshow first, as I think it will cover most of your questions. I ask that you use the spreadsheet, as it'll do most of the math for you, and it will reduce the amount of questions that we have that are already covered. I appreciate you spending this much time with us here. We appreciate your business. I hope this PPP loan was a benefit to your business, and we're glad to be able to be a part of this process with you. Thanks.